It starts with a smile, not the nervous smile of a teenager who doesn't understand the gravity of a courtroom, not the shy grin of someone caught off guard, but the kind of smile that freezes everyone watching because of where it happened and what it meant. 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick sat shackled in a Georgia courtroom, her wrists bound, her orange jumpsuit wrinkled. Cameras captured every second. Reporters scribbled frantically. The judge hadn't spoken yet. And Sarah, she smiled. What kind of person smiles in the face of murder charges? Moments later, the smile faded. Tears spilled down her face. Her body shook. She wept as though reality had just come crashing down on her. But here's the haunting question. Were those tears real? Or was this just another performance? Because Sarah's case isn't like most you've heard before. This wasn't just about a teenager killing her parents. It wasn't just about a quiet suburban home ripped apart by violence. What makes this case different is what Sarah did after the murders. She didn't hide. She didn't run. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She reached out to podcasters, to YouTubers, to true crime influencers. She pitched her own story like it was content, like it was a show. She told them, my case could be a really big hit. She promised she had intel to share. Let that sink in for a moment. A 17-year-old girl murders her parents, then markets her case to creators, as though she were auditioning to be the main character in her own documentary. What drives someone to think that way? Why did Sarah believe her crime wasn't just a tragedy, but a story that deserved an audience? Was this about murder or about fame? Tonight, we're going to unpack the disturbing case of Sarah Grace Patrick, the teenager who blurred the line between violence and viral. But to understand who she was and why she did what she did, we have to go back to Carrollton, Georgia. Carrollton is a small suburban city about 45 miles west of Atlanta, a town that prides itself on family values, Friday night football, and safe neighborhoods. It's the kind of place where people leave doors unlocked and still wave to strangers. The last place you'd expect to be splashed across national headlines. And yet it was here, in this ordinary town, that one family unraveled. On the outside, the Patrick family looked picture perfect. Sarah was 17, a high school student with friends who describe her as fun, energetic, sometimes dramatic, but never dangerous. She was a girl who filled her Instagram feed with selfies, cheered at football games, and blasted music too loud in her car. She could have been anyone's daughter, anyone's classmate, anyone's neighbor. But at home, the cracks were already forming. Her mother, by all accounts, was loving, protective, and determined to keep Sarah focused on school and her future. Her stepfather was stricter, a firm believer in discipline and boundaries. Together, they tried to keep a rebellious teenager in line. But Sarah wasn't interested in rules. She skipped classes. She lied about where she went at night. She tested every boundary. The fights at home became louder, more frequent, more toxic. Curfews, boys, social media, grades. Every day felt like a battle. And while many teenagers fight with their parents, Sarah's mindset was different. She didn't just see herself as a frustrated daughter. She saw herself as the main character in a story. Every argument, every punishment, it was another scene, another chapter. Her friends noticed it too. Sarah sometimes spoke about her life as if she were in a movie. And the genre she loved most? True crime. She devoured documentaries about killers. She binged podcasts about murders in small towns. She watched shows about teenagers who turned on their families. And little by little, she blurred the line between the stories she consumed and the life she was living. On the night of the murders, that line was shattered completely. 2 people were found dead inside their Carrollton home. Sarah's mother, Sarah's stepfather. The details of that night remain chilling, and we'll get into them later. But what matters here, what sets this case apart, is what Sarah did after. Most killers panic. They cover their tracks. They run. They beg. Sarah didn't do any of that. Instead, she opened her phone. She reached out to true crime creators, the same people who built careers telling the stories of other murderers. And she asked them to tell hers. Her words were clear. This case would be a big hit. She could give them intel. What kind of teenager thinks like that? What kind of mind treats the murder of family like a pitch meeting? And why did she believe her story was worth trending? In that moment, Sarah wasn't just a suspect. She was an influencer of her own crime. And that's why this case has gripped the nation, because it forces us to look at something deeper, something uncomfortable. We live in an age where tragedy is consumed like entertainment, where true crime isn't just news, it's podcasts, documentaries, TikTok clips, YouTube deep dives. But rarely do we see the accused step into that spotlight themselves. Rarely do they market their own crime as if it's content. Sarah did. And that's why this story is about more than a murder. It's about the collision of two worlds, violence and viral fame. So now the question is, who really was Sarah Grace Patrick? Was she just another troubled teenager pushed past the edge? Or was she something else entirely? Someone who killed not only out of anger, but out of ambition? To find out, we have to step back. We have to look at who Sarah was before the courtroom, before the murders, before the influencer messages. Because the truth is, Sarah's story doesn't start with death. It starts with a family, a home, a girl who looked like anyone else, until the mask slipped, and when it did, the results were deadly. Carrollton, Georgia, a quiet town, a place where the biggest news is usually a high school football game or a new store opening, a town where neighbors still wave at each other and parents still believe their children are safe. It was here that Sarah Grace Patrick grew up. From the outside, she looked like any other 17-year-old, smiling selfies on Instagram, dancing at football games, singing along to music in the car with her friends. She was the kind of girl you'd never look twice at in the hallway, not because she was invisible, but because she was ordinary, normal, the girl next door. But behind that ordinary facade was something else, something darker. Her friends describe her as fun, dramatic, sometimes a little reckless. The type of friend who would make you laugh one minute, then pick a fight the next. But no one thought of her as dangerous. Her teachers noticed the same thing. Smart when she applied herself. Distracted most of the time. A student who could do well, but didn't care enough to try. At home, though, things were different. Her mother, protective, loving, sometimes strict, was trying to raise her right. Her stepfather, firm, demanding, sometimes harsh, believed in rules and boundaries. Together, they created a home where expectations were high. But Sarah wasn't interested in expectations. She wanted freedom. She wanted control. And she wanted attention. The fights at home became routine. Arguments about boys. Arguments about her phone. Arguments about her grades. About how much time she spent online. About who she was becoming. And every time Sarah was told no, the resentment grew. For most teens, that resentment burns out. For Sarah, it seemed to harden. Because Sarah didn't just see herself as a frustrated daughter. She saw herself as a main character. Every fight, every punishment, it wasn't just life. It was a scene in a story. Have you ever met someone who talks about their own life like it's a movie? Who thinks every argument is part of some bigger plot line? That was Sarah. And the genre she loved most was true crime. Sarah consumed it constantly. Documentaries about killers. Podcasts about cold cases. YouTube videos breaking down the psychology of murderers. And as she absorbed those stories, something began to change. For some, true crime is a cautionary tale, a warning. For Sarah, it felt like inspiration. She began talking about it more, making comments, joking about dark topics. Her friends brushed it off as teenage edginess. But underneath, Sarah was blurring the line between fascination and identification. What happens when the stories we consume become the stories we want to live? Meanwhile, the fights at home escalated. Her stepfather tried to keep order, laying down rules. Sarah pushed back harder. Her mother tried to play peacemaker, but she too became a target of Sarah's growing anger. At school, Sarah put on a mask, smiling, joking, blending in. At home, the mask came off. The resentment boiled over in slammed doors, screaming matches and long, sulking silences. But was this just normal teenage rebellion? Or was it the beginning of something far more dangerous? And then came the obsession with attention. Like so many teens the age of TikTok and Instagram, Sarah craved validation. Every like, every follow, every share, it mattered. It wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was proof that people were watching. And for Sarah, being watched mattered. Her friends noticed it. She wanted to be the center of every story, the one with the wildest tales, the one who got the most attention. But in a town like Carrollton, there are limits to how far a teenager can stand out. There are only so many ways to be noticed, unless, of course, you create a story no one can ignore. This is where the question becomes chilling. Was Sarah's crime born from anger, or was it born from ambition? Because what we know now is that Sarah didn't just murder. She marketed. She believed her story was content. But that belief didn't start in the courtroom. It didn't start with those messages to influencers. It started years earlier, with the fights at home, with the obsession with attention, with the growing sense that she wasn't living a life. She was starring in one. And when her parents became the obstacle to that story, she made the choice to remove them. Think about that for a moment. Most teenagers want freedom. Most teenagers fight with their parents. But most teenagers don't see murder as an option. So what was different about Sarah? Was it the constant diet of true crime content that normalized the idea? Was it the pressure at home, the arguments, the resentment that built until it snapped? Or was it something inside her, something that made her see her own family not as people, but as characters in her narrative? These are the questions that make Sarah's case more than just a headline. These are the questions that make it terrifying. Because if a teenager can kill not just out of rage, but out of a desire for recognition, what does that say about the world we've created? Carrollton didn't see it coming. Her friends didn't see it coming. Maybe even her parents didn't see it coming. But in February, everything Sarah had been building toward came to a breaking point. The arguments, the resentment, the obsession with being seen. And in one violent night, the ordinary suburban life of the Patrick family was gone forever. 2 people were dead, and Sarah Grace Patrick stepped into the spotlight, not as a victim, not as a grieving daughter, but as the star of a story she thought the world should watch. And the most chilling part? She was right, because now millions of people are watching. That night, the night of the murders, is where everything exploded. And what happened inside that house in Carrollton, Georgia, is a story that still leaves people speechless. A story we're about to step into. It was a cold February night in Carrollton, Georgia. The kind of night when neighborhood is quiet, families tucked into their beds, houses glowing faintly with porch lights. But inside one home, the Patrick residence, that peace was about to shatter forever. Sarah Grace Patrick, just 17 years old, had made a decision. And this wasn't teenage rebellion anymore. This wasn't sneaking out a house or slamming a bedroom door. This was something far darker. Her mother was in the kitchen. Her stepfather in the living room. Ordinary routines. Ordinary lives. And then chaos. Police later said the attack was sudden, brutal, and deliberate. 2 people, Sarah's own mother and her stepfather, were left dead inside their home. The scene officers walked into was so violent, one detective admitted it was the kind of image that burns into your brain and never leaves. But here's the question that still hangs in the air. What was going through Sarah's mind in those moments? Was this the release of years of rage? Or was she thinking, even then, about how the story would play on the internet? When police arrived, the neighborhood was already buzzing. Sirens cut through the quiet streets. Neighbors peeked from windows, whispering about what could possibly be happening in the Patrick home. And then came the discovery. Inside the house, the 2 adults lay dead, and Sarah, the teenage daughter, was taken into custody. 17 years old, accused of double murder. But if you think that's where the story takes its darkest turn, you're wrong. Because within hours, Sarah wasn't hiding. She wasn't begging for forgiveness. She wasn't even silent. She was reaching out. In the days following the murders, Sarah did something almost no one could believe. She contacted true crime podcasters and YouTubers. She told them her case would be a really big hit. She offered them intel about what had happened. Think about that for a second. Most killers try to escape the spotlight. They run. They hide. They lie. But Sarah? She invited the spotlight in. She didn't see herself as a criminal. She saw herself as content. What kind of teenager thinks that way? What kind of teenager, in the hours after killing her own parents, starts building her own narrative for clicks, likes, and views? And the strangest part? She was calm. In court at her hearings, Sarah showed two faces. Some days she smiled, almost smug, as though she were playing a role. Other days, she broke down in tears, her body shaking with sobs. Was that grief? Was that guilt? Or was it performance? Even the courtroom couldn't tell the difference. Investigators began piecing it together. The family tension, the constant fights, the obsession with attention, the way Sarah had consumed true crime stories like fuel. And slowly, a picture emerged. This wasn't just murder. This was a teenager scripting her own story. Her parents weren't just victims. They were obstacles. And removing them wasn't just rage. It was a way to step fully into the role she believed was hers, the star of a crime people would never forget. But here's the chilling question that lingers as we look at that night. Was Sarah Grace Patrick the mastermind of her own story? Or was she a broken teenager, spiraling out of control, who snapped in a moment she couldn't take back? Because if she's the mastermind, then we're looking at something terrifying, a generation willing to turn murder into media. And if she's the broken teenager, then maybe the scariest part is how many more like her could be out there, waiting for their story to go viral. The crime scene was closed off. The bodies were taken away. Sarah was booked into custody. But in many ways, that night wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because once Sarah was behind bars, the real show began. The trial, the media frenzy, and the questions that still divide everyone who hears her name. Is Sarah Grace Patrick a cold-blooded killer who turned her family into content? Or is she a lost teenager, consumed by a culture that blurs the line between life and entertainment? That's the story we'll unravel next. When Sarah Grace Patrick walked into the courtroom for the first time, the atmosphere shifted. 17 years old, shackled, dressed in an oversized jumpsuit. And yet, she carried herself like someone who knew the cameras were watching. The photographers clicked. The reporters whispered. The public leaned in. And Sarah? She smiled. Why would a teenager accused of double murder smile at her trial? Was it nerves? Defiance? Or was it performance for us? The prosecution painted her as cold, calculated. A teenager who'd been planning this, who wanted more than freedom. She wanted attention. They showed the jury how she had reached out to podcasters and YouTubers, selling her story as if it were a Netflix pitch. My case could be a really big hit, she had written. But the defense? They told a very different story. They painted Sarah as a victim, a child trapped in a toxic home, a girl who snapped under pressure, someone who wasn't seeking fame, but connection, grasping for anyone who might listen in her darkest hour. So who was Sarah Grace Patrick? The fame-hungry killer? Or the broken teenager? The courtroom became a stage. Every hearing, every expression, every tear was dissected online. People clipped her reactions, slowed them down, posted them on TikTok. Look at the way she smirks here. Pause it. See how the tears stop instantly? Millions of strangers turned her trial into entertainment. And Sarah, knowingly or not, fed the fire. One moment shocked everyone. During a crucial hearing, Sarah burst into uncontrollable sobs. Her shoulders shook, her voice cracked, and she collapsed into her attorney's arms. But the very next day, she smiled again, calm, almost smug. Which face was a real Sarah? The crying child or the smirking star? Even seasoned reporters admitted they didn't know. And the questions only grew louder. Why did Sarah contact influencers instead of lawyers? Why did she seem more concerned with her narrative than her defense? And why, in the age of TikTok and YouTube, do so many teenagers now measure their worth in views? Even in the darkest of moments, the jury sat silent, taking it all in, the testimonies, the evidence, the contradictions. Some said Sarah's obsession with media was proof of guilt. Others said it was proof she was broken, lost in a digital world that had raised her to believe attention equals survival. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a trial about murder. This was a trial about influence, about performance, about a generation that lives with the camera always on. And as the trial came closer to its verdict, the world leaned in again. Because the real question wasn't just, will Sarah Grace Patrick be found guilty? It was, what happens when crime, content, and fame collide? Is Sarah the warning sign of where we're all headed? Because if attention is the new currency, how many more Sarahs are out there, waiting for their story to go viral? The courtroom was silent. You could hear the shuffling of papers, the clicking of a pen, the faint creak of a chair. 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick sat at the defense table, her hands folded tightly, her eyes locked forward. The jury filed back into their seats, each face unreadable, each step echoing like a drumbeat of fate. And then, the words every courtroom holds its breath for. We, the jury, find the defendant. The verdict was read. Sarah Grace Patrick guilty. 2 lives stolen. 1 teenager condemned. The courtroom gasped. Her family side cried in relief, in grief, in exhaustion. Sarah's face? For a moment, just a flicker. Her mask cracked. Her lips trembled. Her eyes glistened. But then, that same calmness returned. Almost like she knew this moment, too, was part of the story. Was she truly breaking inside? Or was she still performing for an invisible audience? The sentence was harsh. And as the judge's gavel slammed, it wasn't just the end of the trial. It was the end of Sarah's freedom. A teenager, barely old enough to vote, barely old enough to graduate, now spending years, maybe decades, behind bars. But even then, Sarah's obsession with attention never stopped. Behind prison walls, she still wrote letters, still spoke about her case, still told anyone who would listen that her story was meant to be heard. And outside the prison, the world couldn't look away. Her case trended. YouTube channels exploded with theories. TikTok creators lip-synced her quotes. Podcasters debated whether she was a monster or a mirror reflecting something far darker about all of us. Because here's the terrifying truth. Sarah Grace Patrick didn't just want fame. She got it. Even in prison, her name was everywhere. Her case became a brand. And strangers, millions of them, helped make it so. So we're left asking, who's really responsible for Sarah Grace Patrick's fame? Her, for chasing it? Or us, for giving it to her? Every click, every share, every video, just like the one you're watching now, keeps her story alive. And maybe that's the part that chills us most. Because Sarah Grace Patrick isn't just one girl who crossed a line. She's a product of a world that rewards clicks over conscience, attention over empathy, and viral stories over quiet lives. The question isn't just, why did Sarah do it? The scarier question is this. How many more teenagers are watching her story right now and wondering how to make their own go viral? That's the story of Sarah Grace Patrick, the teenager who turned tragedy into content, the killer who wanted to be famous, and the case that leaves us asking if the internet itself is creating monsters. It begins with silence, the kind of silence that only comes when a story reaches its final chapter. And yet, this doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a warning. That, my friends, is the story of Sarah Grace Patrick, a 17-year-old girl who didn't just commit an unthinkable crime. She shaped it into something else, a performance, a plea for attention, a viral narrative. But what makes this story stay with us isn't just what Sarah did, it's what she represents. Because the truth is, this was never just about one girl in a quiet Georgia town. This was about a culture, a generation, a society that turned tragedy into entertainment and crime into currency. And Sarah understood that. She leaned into it. She wanted her story to be told. She begged podcasters to cover her, promised them it would be a hit, even offered them intel. She wasn't just a defendant. She was a self-promoter. And now we have to ask ourselves, what does that say about us? What kind of world are we living in where a murder trial feels like content, where a grieving family becomes a storyline, where death itself can be leveraged for views? We like to think we're just observers, outsiders, peering into lives we don't understand. But if we're being honest, we're part of it. Because without clicks, there's no story. Without an audience, there's no stage. Sarah didn't create the platform. We did, and she stepped onto it. So the real question becomes, was Sarah a villain who manipulated her moment, or was she just a mirror reflecting the world we built back at us? I want you to really sit with that, because this isn't just her story. It's ours. How many of us spend hours every day chasing approval, likes, validation? How many times have you caught yourself checking notifications, refreshing feeds, waiting for someone to see you? Sarah's obsession ended in blood, but the hunger behind it, that gnawing need to be noticed, lives in millions of us. And that's what makes her case so disturbing, because it doesn't feel like some distant nightmare. It feels familiar. That's why this story cuts so deep. Not because Sarah was unique, but because she wasn't. And that should scare us all. So I'll leave you with this. What would you do for attention? Where's the line? When does being seen become being consumed? And how far are we willing to go before we lose ourselves completely? Sarah Grace Patrick may spend the rest of her life behind bars, but the culture that shaped her, that culture is still out here, still alive, still feeding. And if we don't start questioning it, confronting it, changing it, there will be another Sarah, and another, and another. This story doesn't end here. It just begins. So now I turn it over to you. Was Sarah a broken teenager lost in a system that failed her? Or was she a calculating manipulator who knew exactly what she was doing? Was she a victim of our culture or a mastermind who weaponized it? Tell me what you think in the comments. I'm going to read every single one, because this story only matters if we talk about it, debate it, wrestle with it together. And that's what this community is about. We don't just watch. We investigate. We ask questions. We refuse to look away. So if you've made it this far, join us. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because next week, we're diving into another case. One with even more twists, more lies, and revelations that will make you question everything you think you know about crime and the internet. Sarah's story is unforgettable, but it's not the last. So until then, stay curious, stay questioning, and above all, stay safe out there.